All right. Happy Friday. We are ending this week of the Healthy for the Holidays series on the nervous system. And today I just want to do a recap of the system, why we pay attention to it, what it is, and how it impacts your life on a day-to-day basis. And then as a reminder, we will be moving into habits next week, which is one of people's favorite weeks because it is a very practical application of some of this information. We're going to take a deep dive into your habits, what they are, how they're formed, how to change them, and a different way of looking at them. Okay, so that kicks off next week. So to wrap up our nervous system session, now, just as a quick reminder, I've said this a few times, but the nervous system is such an important topic. The first point I made on Monday of this week was that your nervous system is the control panel for everything you do in your life. And that is everything from breathing to, heart beating, lungs pumping, blood circulating through the system, to everything you say, every movement you make, everything you think, everything you feel. Quite literally, everything about how you live, who you are, and what you do is controlled by your nervous system, by that control panel. So the fact that the nervous system is a popular topic these days is actually pretty important. And what I tried to do this week is to break it down into sort of manageable chunks for you to understand a little bit better. But certainly it was not a deep dive or extensive overview of the system, which I just can't do in 10-minute snippets, So control panel for everything that you are, everything you say, think, feel, do, etc. Every way you move, you got that. Control panel, that's what your nervous system is. That's why you should care about it. Number two, your nervous system states move from connection to activation to shutdown, and back from shutdown to activation to connection. Now, again, that's a very broad stroke. The clinical terms for these things are ventral vagal, sympathetic, and dorsal vagal. These are your states. But to think about it in a more general term, connection, activation, shutdown, shutdown, activation, connection. Now, in a process that I take all of my clients through, I explain each state, and each client goes through a process of getting their specific flavor of what their state means, how to recognize it, how to identify it, how to use it. Okay. So, but just for, the general purposes, connection, activation, and shutdown. Now, one of the things I didn't mention that I think is incredibly important to understand is that when you are in activation or shutdown, you do not have access to connection. This is why people talk a lot about the nervous system. If the nervous system is dysregulated, if it's in a sympathetic state or a dorsal vagal state, if it's in activation or shutdown, if it's dysregulated, you do not have access to connection. So when people are trying to get you to just get over it, or just feel better, or just don't worry about it, or one of the best examples I can give of this is your kids, right? When they are throwing a tantrum, when they're in the middle of their tantrum is not the time for you to say, I need you to listen to me, right? And a lot of parents do that. They'll say, I need you to listen to me. I want you to listen to my words, pay attention. They can't. When our nervous system state is in activation or shutdown, we do not have access to connection. You cannot be in both connection or sympathetic or dorsal at the same time. It's one or the other. That's the way the nervous system works. We shut off access to one while we turn on access to the other. So when you're telling your kids, pay attention to me while they're in a tantrum, they cannot. They're not trying to be manipulative. They're not trying to be, bad kids. They cannot. They do not have access to that state. So that's a good example. And it's one of the ways that we work with it so intensely in my programs, is that getting people to understand that when you are in activation or shutdown is not the time for you to, make better decisions, or just don't have this, or just say no to that. We have to work with the state that we're in in order to have a better outcome or result. So I want to emphasize that strongly, is that when you are in activation or shutdown, you do not have access to growth and repair or connection. Okay. So when somebody is saying, just get over it, or just feel better, or, that why don't you just do this? When we start working with nervous system states and you start to recognize which state you're in, you start to realize, oh, I need to get myself out of this sympathetic nervous system state before I can go back into parasympathetic, so I can, think differently or think more clearly. If we want to take it to adults, this happens a lot. Like, let's say you're fighting with your partner. If you are in sympathetic activation or shutdown, is not the time to work it out with your partner, right? Because the things that will come out of your mouth, the tone of your voice, the things that you will say are different in those states than they would be if you were in a state of more connection, which is a ventral vagal state, right? So when you're in your ventral vagal state of connection, then you have access to, oh yes, I can understand what you were saying and why you felt that way, and here's what I would like to do about it. But when you are in activation, sympathetic activation, or dorsal vagal shutdown, you don't have access to those skills and those cues, right? So that's another really interesting piece of the nervous system, is that the way our systems were designed were to either protect us or lead us to safety, right? And so when we are in protection mode, we don't have access to the tools and the skills we need to be in safety mode, okay? The other thing we talked about was neuroception. And that's this concept of your body, your physiology. Candace Pert coined the term body-mind, right? Body-mind being one word, because the body, 80% of our information comes from the physiology up to the neurology, right? So 80% of the information comes from the body, which is neuroception, because it's below our level of awareness, sending signals to the mind. And by the time the mind gets that information and we start to make a story of it, which I'm going to talk about in a second, the body has already experienced these cues of safety or danger and started activating systems in order to deal with whatever the cues are. So by the time the body, who is scanning the environment at all times for cues of safety and danger, that's called neuroception, by the time the body sends those signals to the brain where we can understand it, that's called perception. By the time we perceive something that's going on, a cue, a feeling, an emotion, a bodily sensation, something, by the time we perceive it, the body has already activated systems to deal with whatever its neuroceptive cues are. Meaning, if it's safe, the body has already activated systems to, be in connection. If it's danger, the body has already activated systems to shut down. If it's life threat, the body has already activated systems to curl up. Okay. So by the time you get that information in your cognitive awareness and it becomes perception, the body has already started its systems working in the right direction to deal with whatever the situation is. That is incredibly important, because in that way, our stories follow our state. They are reacting to the state of our body. And so one of the ways that we can more effectively manage our reactions, our interactions with people, our interactions with our environment, because remember I said neuroception is the process of the body scanning the environment inside in the physiology, outside in your external environment, and between any human or animal, any system, any between systems. So your system is reacting to my system right now. That's the between. So inside the body, outside the environment, and between. A more successful, productive way for us to respond and to interact with our environments, inside, outside, and between, is to recognize what's going on, the cues that are sent from our system, before we make a story. right? So as I mentioned yesterday, there's the opportunity to, instead of saying, well, he just made me mad, that is not as effective for us in the long term as being able to say, I notice what's going on in my system when somebody does or says XYZ, and being able to identify what it is. So maybe it was the tone of his voice. Maybe it was the look on his face. Maybe it was that when he said these words, it triggered a memory in you of what it felt like when your mom said these words, whatever it was. But the point is, when we go inside and recognize the origin of our thoughts, feelings, emotions, physiology, it gives us an opportunity to interact with everyone and everything in our environment differently. A lot of people call this radical responsibility. So anytime we're having a reaction, we go inside and we say, what is happening for me? Not what did this person do? What was that external environment? He did this, she said that. Well, if they wouldn't do this and if they wouldn't do that, we give our power away when we look externally to figure out what's happening for us. Anytime we can go internal and say, I can recognize my state changes and the cues from people when my state changes. Like I said, maybe it's a tone of voice, maybe it's a facial expression, maybe it's them looking on their phone while I'm trying to talk to them. And so that cues this, whatever it is. When we can look at it from a, when I interact with this environment or person or system, my system does this. Now, how would I like to get my system back into regulation? We have so much more opportunity to interact with our environment differently. Okay, many of you are super into this and can really see the utility in your lives. Please, 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 if you're not already, get on the wait list for the shift. You can do that at my website, elizakingsford.com. I'll put the links in here. We go through this very methodically and slowly, and you learn specifically what your nervous system looks like, the cues of safety and danger in your system, the flavors of each of the 3 states of your nervous system, how to identify neuroception, what attunement means, how your system gets tuned, all of that stuff. We take a really deep dive. So if you want nothing else from the shift, which, you know, people want a whole lot of things from the shift, that alone will be incredibly powerful to transform your life. So hop on the wait list. We start in January, just over 5-6 weeks from now. Holy cow. Can you believe January is less than a month away? All right, I digress. We will see you on Monday. We start habits on Monday. I love habits, one of my favorite topics. I think I say that about all the topics that I talk about, which just means I'm talking about the right things. I hope you all have a fabulous weekend. We'll pick this up next week. Thanks, everybody.